Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton. But where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Impro Pod podcast. My guest today is Glenn Berger, who's a psychotherapist and musician. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So, what kind of psychotherapy do you do, and how is that related to music?
I should probably start out by saying that when I was 17 years old, I had the incredible experience of working at one of the greatest recording studios of all time, a place called A&R Studios in New York. And I was mentored by Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award-winning producer-engineer Phil Ramone. Phil is featured, by the way, in the recent documentary about Billy Joel. He produced all of Billy's biggest hits, as well as many other projects. And at that studio, I got to work with some of the greatest artists of that time, including Bob Dylan and Frank Sinatra and Mick Jagger and Steely Dan. One of the proudest accomplishments for me was working on the soundtrack for the film All That Jazz. That was an extraordinary experience learning about film music. And as I like to say, when you work on an album, as we would sometimes do for a year, the space between the notes would get bigger and bigger. So I felt that I was really able to penetrate music on a very, very deep level by being with these folks and being that recording engineer. It was also a world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And after about 20 years in the business, I was completely burnt out. I'd pretty much destroyed my life with drugs and adultery and things like that. I was completely lost. And I had this transformative experience where I had this revelation that I needed to change my life. And I decided to go back to school. I'd never gone to college because I was right in the studio at 17. And what I decided to study was how I had gotten so lost, and if I could figure that out and how to find myself again, maybe I could help other people do the same thing. And that's been my journey for the last many decades, and that's what led me to become a psychotherapist. So I work with all kinds of people, but I do work with a lot of artists, a lot of creative people, a lot of musicians, a lot of actors, a lot of composers. I love working with artists, and I am one myself. I really understand the process and the pain that goes along with being an artist, especially in the world that we live in today. There's always going to be that overlap between my loves of art, music, and psychotherapy. And clearly they both involve a lot of listening. So we try to listen with the third ear and listen deeply.
So I'm going to play you a piece of improvised music, and I'd like you to tell me what it makes you think of. So that's anything that comes into your mind. Don't analyze it too much.
Very good.
So what did you think of that?
It reminded me of a trip that I had on mushrooms many, many years ago, where I was sitting on a rock in the middle of a stream, and I had this experience that I became the mushroom and the mushroom became me. And the mushroom had the experience of being a sentient being for a while. He was so excited to suddenly have eyes and senses and a voice. And I couldn't move from the rock because I had become the mushroom. Just seeing and perceiving nature and the water and feeling the air and the sky through that altered perception.
It's interesting how there's a mushroom theme on the podcast at the moment. Dan Blackwell on episode 54 talks about making music with mushrooms and getting mushrooms to trigger synthesizers for a soundtrack to a documentary they were making about mushrooms. He also said that there was a correlation between how the mushrooms looked and the particular sounds they produced. The sort of prettier ones were making nicer sounds, and then the kind of ugly looking, kind of gnarly ones were making quite discordant, kind of heavy music.
I studied harmony very deeply, and I love the concept that we hear.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Mathematically, that the simpler ratios we find beautiful and the more complex ratios we find more discordant or dissonant, and that our ear knows those ratios. And it sounds like the same thing with the mushrooms, like the pretty mushrooms create more harmonious music, and the more complex mushrooms, we don't have the capacity to understand it as much. I don't think dissonance is ugly. I think it's a matter of comprehension. And as a musician, if you do the right voice leading, combinations that might otherwise sound dissonant as part of something that you're doing sounds beautiful or sounds correct or sounds comprehensible. And of course, the deeper you go in to something like music, the more you can comprehend, and the more you can comprehend, the more you can understand and then feel the beauty in all those combinations.
Like one particular example for me of that is that the major seven, you've got a C and C sharp. It's not very nice to listen to, but then you add the F on the top and you get A flat. So it's still got those two notes in it, but because of the context, they change from unpleasant to pleasant. So from a kind of mathematical perspective, when you were talking about these ratios, what is going on there in your brain when I add these other notes? Why does it sound more pleasant?
Yeah, I wish I knew what was going on in the brain, but we know that also from theory, the overtone theory, which is that every note is in every note, right? In more or less different ratios or volumes, right? So that the more remote overtones are much quieter than the overtones that are closer to the primary note. So if you pluck a string, half of the string is vibrating as well as the whole string is vibrating. And a third of the string is vibrating as well as the whole string. And a fourth of the string is vibrating as well as the whole string. And each one of those vibrations produces a different note. We don't necessarily perceive it, but those combinations of what are called overtones give a particular instrument its timbre. It's what makes a trumpet sound different than a violin, is that combination of overtones, so the underlying notes that are also resonating, that are also being created when you pluck that string or however you're creating that sound. And we don't necessarily perceive all of those other notes that are ringing when you play that string. We hear the main note that's being played, but all the other notes are in there somewhere. they're resonating as overtones. I think that music is kind of an explication of that. It's an unpeeling or spreading out of all of those relationships in sequence in time rather than simultaneous. When you pluck the string, they're all happening at one time. But when you're playing a piece of music, you're spreading out those sounds over the course of time in particular relationships.
If you have the fundamental frequency of C, which is the octave below middle C, the overtones would be middle C, and then G, and then the C above that, and then E, and then G, and then A sharp, C, D, E. So you're hearing all of those notes to a lessening degree when you play the note C.
So the octave of the C is going to be the loudest, and then the fifths and the fourths and the thirds. There's a journey, right, that we start someplace, we leave, and then we come back. And there's that feeling of completion that people love. That's why we love pop music, and all the progressions are generally very simple and the same, because we love that feeling of departing and then returning and coming back home, coming back to the fundamental. And so there's something in our brain that's searching for what's embedded in those notes that we're hearing. So there's something that says, oh no, I'm not home. I'm not resolved. And then we get that feeling, that experience of resolution. Because we're actually perceiving, I think, those harmonic relationships when we hear any particular note. I don't know what the pleasure is in simplicity, but I think our brains also line up and vibrate with those simple relationships.
And do you have any idea why certain music makes you think of certain things?
So we know that memory works by associative networks. Now, there's a lot about this that I think nobody really understands. But we know that...
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
When you have a particular experience, it lights up a certain network of neuronal connections in the brain. So when something happens in the present that evokes or associates to something in the past, that network gets lit up. So there are so many associative qualities. There can be a very direct experience, like if you played a melody from the first Peter, Paul and Mary album, which was the first album that I listened to when I was 5 years old, it would light up that associative network. I would associate to, oh yeah, I remember when I was listening to that record. I can see the cover. I can hear Mary Travers' voice. So there are clearly very direct associations. Sometimes it's more remote, and sometimes it's so remote you don't even know what the association, what the linkage is for the brain in that moment. And the brain is so fast and so amazing and so mysterious that how can you even tell why a particular moment in music evokes a particular emotion that reminds you of something? Why were the sounds that you were creating brought me back to that particular moment? There was probably a sequence of associations that happened. I'm hearing something that sounds like sparkling water, which takes me back to a moment that I was in a river and I was sitting on a rock and I was taking mushrooms and I had this experience. All those different parts of the brain are getting lit up, one association leading to the next, and I think a lot of it happens so fast that we don't even know what those things are, but I would say that it's probably very associative. You know, if you played something that sounded like Balinese gamelan music, now, I've been to Bali, and I know what that music sounds like, and I loved it, and I had amazing experiences being there. But if somebody had never been there, and they heard that music, they might say, "What? This sounds like cacophony. What is this?" Right? Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the associative networks.
Ah, it's fascinating stuff. I guess that music from Bali is quite discordant to us in terms of our Western understanding of tuning.
The tuning part of it, yes, exactly right. The bells are tuned very differently than our tempered tuning that we are used to, that our ears are used to.
Do you think when a Balinese person hears Western music, is what we consider harmonious dissonant to them?
That's a great question. I'd like to know that. And in fact, because they also use more of a pentatonic scale or a 5-note scale, would they hear our 7-note scale as something weird? That would be a great question. But I think that they would definitely prefer their own music. And I think that's another reason that popular music is so popular, is because it's so familiar to us. One of the most amazing things, mysterious things about music, as far as I'm concerned, is I know all of the elements of music. I know what makes music good, but I can't write a hit song. So somebody who can take those basic elements and turn it into something that is compelling is so fascinating to me, such a mystery.
So I'd like you to tell me a story of some kind, and then I'll break the story down into sections and improvise a soundtrack to the story.
So I'm actually going to tell a story that includes a piece of music. I had a client who had a very hard time allowing his emotions to be seen in front of another person. And this limited his ability to form deep and intimate relationships. But he noticed that when he listened to certain pieces of music, it allowed him to feel very deeply. And so he had this idea that he would come into our session and he would play one of those pieces of music and we would listen to it together. And perhaps he wouldn't be able to help himself, but experience a deep emotion in front of another person, stimulated by this piece of music. So we set up our little sound system in the studio, whatever the technology was at that time. And he hit the play button, and the song was Aretha Franklin's version of Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Paul Simon. I closed my eyes and we were listening to it. And all of a sudden, this profound and deep emotion started rising up in me. I could feel it starting in my belly, moving up through my chest, and eventually tears were streaming down my face. Now, this was supposed to be a therapy session for him, but I'm having this transformative experience. And what it brought back for me was that when I was 18 years old or so,
Transform your home during Blinds.com's Black Friday Super Sale. Get up to 50% off site-wide, plus huge doorbuster deals on popular styles. Go DIY and do it all 100% online, or choose white glove service with expert design help and professional installation. Both backed by Blinds.com's 100% satisfaction guarantee. Blinds.com's Black Friday Super Sale is here. Save up to 50% site-wide and get a free professional measure. Limited time offer, rules and restrictions apply. See Blinds.com for details.
I was working in the studio with Paul Simon when I was first an assistant engineer. I was thrown into that amazing experience, and Paul he was not an easy person to be around or to deal with, but I got to experience the creation of some of his greatest music on the album Still Crazy After All These Years. And I had very complex feelings about my experience in the studio because it had been amazing, but also very, very painful in many ways. And I started having all of these memories of my years in the studio, and it actually led me to end up writing a memoir about it all, to process all of those feelings. But it all began in that experience of sitting with my client and listening to that extraordinary piece of music together. It was supposed to change his life, but it changed mine.
Do you know what it was about that piece of music? It's just the memory you had of Paul Simon, those recording sessions. You said there's a kind of almost a conflict of memories. There's a kind of amazing experience, but also the pain and the determination.
Yeah, my father died when I was very young. I had this unconscious desire for a good father. And both Phil Ramone, who was my mentor, and Paul Simon, this 18-year-old kid in this room with these two giants, they were not the fathers that I was looking for. They treated me very, very harshly. That was the way you learned back in New York in the 70s. That kind of treatment would be illegal today, but at that time, it was just the way that it was done. After a couple of years of that, I was a great recording engineer. I love Phil Ramone. He's dead now, but he was such an important figure in my life. And so resolving those two pieces of somebody who gave me so much but treated me so badly, both of those guys, was a source of a lot of conflict. And it was through the beginning of that moment and then writing the book that I was really able to resolve my complex feelings about all of that. And as far as that piece of music is concerned, first of all, Aretha Franklin, I think, is the greatest singer of all time. And I think a part of that is what we were talking about in the beginning, which was that she allowed her heart to fully open. She held nothing back when she sang. So many of us don't have the courage to do that. So we're willing to pay to see somebody walk on that tightrope, to really open themselves up absolutely without any kind of boundary. And it's so moving because I think we connect when we listen to her. When I was listening to her, I connected to her heart. My heart connected to her heart in that music. Paul Simon captured something in that song that's ineffable. You could break it down to all of the elements, but then there's something that's transcendent about a piece of music like that reaches into everybody.
So I'm going to improvise a soundtrack to that kind of experience, because I don't want to try and rip the song off. Get a sense of this experience of being conflicted. You were at this recording studio, you had this amazing time and you learned all this stuff and you met these people and it was kind of pushed you, but there's also this angst and this kind of pain behind it that then hopefully gets resolved. This memory kind of gets resolved as you listen to this Bridge Over Troubled Water. So I'm going to try and get a sense of that as a more of a complete thing rather than trying to reference the song, because that could be tricky. How was that? I was sort of trying to channel a bit of the kind of soul sound, mostly based around two chords, the kind of A major and the kind of A7. It's like A and D, and then kind of playing with these extensions of the sevens. And then for the kind of idea of the sense of the struggle and the pain, just departing from the key, going quite dissonant, bit out there, a bit kind of... It's a very flat kind of F minor situation. What was that experience of me playing the music like for you?
I really appreciated your courage to do this spontaneously. And then I could really perceive and experience how you opened up your heart. I don't know if it's a one-to-one correspondence, but I've had the experience enough times in the opposite direction, where when I'm feeling something very deeply, somebody else has an experience.
So the music that I played, did that evoke any memories for you? Did you sense a connection between what I played and the story you told?
Yeah, yeah, in the sense that rather than a direct memory of a time or a place, that what music does for me and what your playing did for me is that it connects me to a part of myself, and then something that's outside of myself. Music is so meaningful to me and has always been so meaningful to me that when I hear it, or I hear somebody like you expressing yourself through music, it touches a core part of me that I love. And it's something that's wonderful about being alive. And even that, I think that part of the resolution that I had to the pain that I went through was, first of all, recognizing that every artist that I work with suffers pain. Like, those people were treating me the way they were treating me because of their own pain. And that, in fact, even though I was complaining about it at the time, I was able to have absolutely extraordinary experiences being in the presence of these geniuses. Whatever pain was involved in that, it helped me see that that's what life is. Just like I was saying, every note is in every note. Music expresses what can't be put into words. And that's what got touched in me. So it wasn't a direct moment or a direct connection to that story, but a connection to my relationship to music.
So would you like to tell me another story? Something possibly a bit simpler?
A simpler story. Yeah. No, I don't have any simple stories, Luke. I only have complicated stories. I know. I'm trying to think of something for your improv. But yeah, so I was saying before about how I had this revelatory experience when I decided to become a therapist. So I was 37. I was in despair. I was at a birthday party for me. Some friends were there. I was complaining. I was moaning and groaning. What should I do with my life? And there was a woman there who was having a migraine headache. She was passed out on the table. She lifted her head and said, "Go to Ellis Island." Ellis Island is where millions of immigrants came into the United States in New York Harbor. Now it's a tourist site. My grandfather came through there in 1906 when he was 16 without a nickel in his pocket. I went out to the island, and on the seawall are written the names of all the immigrants who came through that island to process to come into the U.S. And I found my grandfather's name. And in desperation, I said, "Grandpa, what should I do with my life?" And like many grandfathers have probably said to their children, he said, "Go back to school." I said, "I don't have the time. I don't have the money." I was producing and writing jingles at that time. It was a nice living, even though I hated doing the work. I didn't want my tombstone to read "Brainwash small children into buying plastic for a living." "I can't go back to school." He said, "Why do you think I came to this country? I came here for you. I knew I was never going to make it. I came for the promise of my grandchildren. So don't tell me you can't do it and you don't have the time and the money. Figure it out." I couldn't argue with that. And so that was October, and by January I was back in school.
If he hadn't have pushed you, if he hadn't have told you that, you just said, get on with whatever you're doing, we would have had a different course of life.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the music then, if there was a kind of an emotion or a change in emotions attached to that story, attached to what your grandfather said to you, maybe your hesitancy to take his advice, what would that be?
Yeah, so I would say that the emotion starts out as despair and being lost. And then there was this feeling of when you're standing on the precipice of something, that there's fear and reluctance and resistance. And then it was as if the clouds parted. In fact, when I came back to shore, all the colors seemed brighter. It was a gorgeous October day, blue sky, red leaves, golden leaves on the trees. So there was a real opening and way more than relief, but an incredible sense of excitement and clarity of vision. So it was from despair to happiness, really.
That was interesting.
Right. So when you play, do you have that reflective thing of like, oh, who just did that? Where did that come from?
The interesting thing was just like this relationship between dissonance and despair. So, and on that despair section, there was sort of two things going on there. One was the playing quite uncomfortable notes together, but also the way I was playing it is very lazy and disconnected. There's a difference between if you play discordant notes very deliberately, you get this sense of like you're hunting something or being chased.
Right. Horror.
I was sort of taking this very lazy approach, this very kind of disconnected, visualizing the despair somehow in my mind, and that becoming more harmonious and then gaining more purpose, thinking about this idea of gaining more purpose. You know, to me, that has a kind of purpose. You've got an A flat major chord and then adding extra notes. A flat and then A flat 6 and then A flat 7 and then kind of the full chord. And so this sense of separating, of expanding. So if you come out of depression or you change in your life somehow, this sense of expansion happens, don't you think, in terms of just your perception of things? And I think you were talking about that, the way you became aware of the leaves and everything became brighter and stuff. I was trying to reflect that in the music.
Yeah, beautifully done. And that lazy dissonance experience is more interior, right? That when you're playing it hard, it's like horror, like something's chasing you from the outside. But when you played it in that lazy way, it's more that interior emotional lostness, moving from being lost to being found, purposeful, directed, expanding. And then coming out of yourself, right? Now I'm aware of my surroundings. Now I'm aware of the nature that I'm embedded in.
What did you get out of this podcast?
I felt a little scared going into this improvisatory world, being unprepared, not knowing what we were going to do, not knowing what was going to happen. And that's also very exciting. And I appreciate that adventure and that adventurous spirit that you have. I've done a bunch of podcasts, but this is not the way we conventionally do it, right? It's like, here are the questions and here are my answers, and that's the way it goes. So I really admire you for doing it this way. I heard a radio broadcast with Ricky Lee Jones many years ago, pre-podcast land. And she did that. She improvised on the radio. And I thought, oh my God, that is so courageous. And she said that if it wasn't for music, she would be insane. And so clearly there's something that in all of us needs to be expressed. So good for you for expressing it and for inviting me to do it.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's very insightful interview. So how can people find out more about you and the workshops that you do online?
So along with my individual work and group work, I've created an online self-cultivation course called Heart Finders, where people can learn more in a couple hours than they would in 10 years of therapy. There are over 60 exercises to self-cultivate. If you're stuck in your life in one place or another, or one way or another, this is a method to get you unstuck. There's also community support on this platform. One way to learn about it is to go to go.heartfinders.co. So that's go.heartfinders, HEARTFINDERS.co. You can set up a meeting with me. You can watch a video. And so there's lots of ways to connect with me.
Thank you very much. It's been very insightful. Join us again for another episode of ImproPod. Thanks for listening.